1,000 flick reactions, 30 minutes of tracking targets, 10 minutes of target switching, 10 minutes of combination training, 1 visual reaction diagnostic, and 10 minutes of form practice every single day for 1 week. This is the story of my 7-day self-improvement challenge to exercise and try to enhance my speed and accuracy on FPS games with an aim training program. I used to subscribe to the false notion that if you wanted to get a lot of kills at FPS games, you had to be some kind of genetic Twitch aim freak as a prerequisite. Until it first dawned on me, while seeing highlights from competitive streamers, that you could actually use aim training as a sort of exercise and cultivate it the same way a weightlifter would gain muscle mass by following a workout routine. To anybody who roots for an underdog, being naturally gifted at FPS games isn't nearly as exciting as being able to actually improve your aim to the point where you can compete with people who might have started out with more natural ability. So, in order to prove to myself that hard work beats natural talent, this week I challenged myself to improve my aim in only 7 days. I've done this before, but I wanted to see if 7 days would be enough time to make a stepped improvement. So, what do I actually mean by improvement? Any of the above would constitute improvement. Setting new records in Kovaak's, the tool I'm going to use, seeing an upward trend in each event, or improving my KD ratio in FPS games would all be decent indicators that I had improved. So I turned off distractions, I logged my hours and all of my progress in spreadsheets, and then I analyzed the results. I'm gonna break them down for you here, but I want to spend the next few minutes just giving you a little bit more background and motivation for why you might want to try this challenge, and see if it's worthwhile depending on the games that you play. Now, the way I tend to think, I approach this challenge in a highly analytical manner, which may or may not be your cup of tea. I'm probably going to go in too much depth, but try to follow along. I'll try to explain everything as I go. But you don't just start training your aim like Rock Lee with his taijutsu out of nowhere. It all started out with frustration because I was underperforming in modern battle royale games like Fortnite and Apex Legends, where whatever you think of them, they maximize playtime and not necessarily the amount of time the players are battling. So it almost feels like they're sapping away at your skills when you're playing at times. It's readily apparent that combat is relatively infrequent, and players rarely have opportunities to battle and sharpen what's arguably the most important skill, combat, which includes aim, and was more frequent in older titles. Instead, these battle royale experiences turned into walking simulators where I ran across the map at full speed, looting all the time, but then face-planted my way into many embarrassing deaths, further driving down an already abysmal KD ratio. I didn't want to cheese camping or hiding, strategies that may be successful for low-ability players, but they avoid addressing fundamentally bad aim mechanics, because that just meant that I was avoiding working on my poor combat performance at all in the first place. Now, you might argue that there are other methods, such as tracking your KD ratio, and there are websites that break down some of this. It makes your performance measurable, but still, there are unsteady measures of being bad at games, and they're really subject to high RNG. You might spawn in the wrong place and just get killed instantly, without even getting a chance to exercise your skills. That didn't always tell me whether my aim was improving. From game to game, the questions I was asking myself were, how quickly was I actually finding targets? And was my percentage accuracy actually improving? Few are the games that break down detailed analytics in this level of granular detail. While kill-death ratios show broad, wide-ranging improvement, variability such as good or bad RNG in a battle royale, or joining a particularly strong or weak lobby in a team-based FPS like Overwatch can potentially skew your KD ratio in a way that doesn't actually match your skill, leading to a sense that FPS games are unfair and unforgiving and only meant for people with freakishly good reaction time and a 3000 Hz monitor and 0 ping. That can't be true, and I had to prove to myself that anyone, even an average person with average reaction time, can improve. Now, as an aside, obviously aim isn't the only important skill involved in FPS games. There's also a plethora of other elements, like dodging enemy shots, using cover, decision-making, reading enemy movement and animations, and overall just game sense, which is kind of intangible, but this self-improvement experiment focuses solely on improving mechanics and seeing whether I can actually shoot and track targets, improve my mechanics more quickly and accurately given enough practice and in a relatively short but intense 7-day training routine. What's exciting about this is that these mechanics, given the right calibration in your control settings, transfer. That is, good mechanics carry across from game to game, and largely speaking, you'll see across-the-board improvement if you improve at the mechanics of the aim trainer. So let's get into the experiment itself. Now, my primary tool to improve my aim was a program called Kovaak's Aim Trainer, which I like a lot. I found it on Steam, although I also employed other methods like reaction time tests and line tracing programs, and even things like MS Paint you could use, in theory, if you were doing it right, to augment the self-improvement process and continue your experiment. There are plenty of good tools out there that accomplish more or less the same task. I'm going to describe the routine I used in case you want to follow along in the future and try it out for yourself, since this is a process that can help almost anybody improve, given the right work ethic. You also need the right tools and information, which will give you stepped improvements. But word of warning, if you're really experienced in aiming already, this routine will probably seem very basic and you'll want to move on to more advanced stuff. But for me, it worked out for a week. For my aim workout regimen, I took the advice from a popular guide by Aimer7, which uses 6 exercises targeting specific aiming mechanics, and each isolating a different type of skill, some of which are more applicable to certain games than others. So each day when I turned on Kovaak's, I would complete 10 time trials, usually 30 to 60 seconds of high-intensity intervals, on about 6 different events in the Aim Trainer. You can think of these like reps in a workout routine, and I kept a log of my reflections and findings as I performed for each of them. I also recorded and tracked my actual aim trials so that you can see the video footage for yourself over the days. It took me about 2 hours to complete the routine each day, though probably 2.5 if you factor in the time for data entry and filming my trials and organizing them later on for comparison and analysis if you wanted to do this. Like any other mechanical skill or building muscle memory, aim training requires rest and spaced repetition to build a good habit, as well as separate sessions to focus on ergonomics and avoid injury and maintain efficiency. Aim training exercises can largely be classified into 3 categories: tracking, target switching, and combination aiming. To provide an analogy, you can think of each of these categories as working out different muscle groups in the gym, and they all go by different names too. Tracking aim, otherwise known as persistence aim, involves following a moving target with your mouse and keeping it steadily focused on it for a sustained time period. Targets will usually move unpredictably throughout the events, whereas in games you would read enemy animations, they just move around randomly in Kovaak's. It's obviously useful to games where enemies require this type of persistence aim, more than a single flick shot to kill. Target switching, sometimes known as flick shooting or click time reaction, involves shooting stationary targets, but requires that the player be able to easily switch between targets without over-aiming or under-aiming, generally giving a sense of how in tune the player is with his or her mouse, especially at his level of sensitivity. Some people take 400 DPI, some people take 800 DPI, some people take whatever DPI they want, but it's whatever works for you. I would say that most people's sensitivity is probably too high if they never examined their aim before, as it's a far more convenient thing to do high DPI in tasks like web browsing and minimizes hand and muscle strain for everyday computing tasks. Combination aiming combines both methods, as you probably guessed, and is probably the most useful to train, in my opinion, since it's usually moving enemies that you'll be shooting in FPS games, unless if you're going up against a bunch of bots, and takes only a couple well-placed shots to kill. For Kovaak's, this means that enemies will be moving, but will usually require only a simple click to eliminate, or a couple seconds of tracking. Remember how I said that I was scared if you didn't have good visual reaction time, you wouldn't be able to perform well at any event? Well, to kind of test that out for myself, in each event, visual reaction time, yes, it is a help, but it isn't always game-breaking, as there are ways you can predict when your cursor will be hovering over your target before your eyes even see it if you've developed a high level of speed and mouse confidence. Literally, if you've reached this level of aim, your hand might be faster than your eye, so it might not be a be-all and end-all, but I was curious as to whether this would limit me or not, so I added taking a visual reaction time diagnostic into my routine. People will dispute this, but I threw it in there anyway. For alternative methods interesting to me this time, I decided to see if using another line tracing program called Ultrabullet Curves would aid in my practicing of my form in tracing straight lines and curved lines between targets, as I've often suffered from not the neatest form in the past. It's been pretty sloppy. Most of these alternate methods accomplish more or less the same thing as one of the events though. I just wanted to throw something fun in and different to keep myself motivated, and if you ever try this for yourself, it's a great idea to have one day where you try fun new events and just attempt to set a new record or have some way to break the daily grind, because it can become very monotonous if you don't switch events. Alright, you've been such a good audience. Thank you for staying with me for that really long-winded explanation. Let's look at my actual training and results. The first event is one wall, one target. In each repetition or trial, I have 60 seconds to shoot targets that appear on a wall. Each time I shoot one, the next target appears immediately, which is where the visual reaction time comes in. I have to react to a new target 100 times. My final score is generated by tallying the number of targets I hit, then counting the amount of time remaining, if any, in case I managed to shoot all 100 targets before 60 seconds was up, and then multiply by my percentage accuracy to account for each time I missed a target. You're rewarded for being fast and accurate. Most events in Kovaak's work like this, and my graphs display the trial number on the x-axis and the score I got for the event on the y-axis. You can think of it like this. How accurate and fast am I hitting the targets? If I can hit only 30 targets in 1 minute with 100% accuracy, I'm probably not as good as someone who can hit 90 targets with only 90% accuracy, despite the fact that the other person has a higher accuracy. I'll probably be slower to the kill in a competitive game situation anyway. This event is classified as target switching with heavy emphasis on visual reaction time. You can see a slight upward trend in my week-long progress, and definitely if you look back at the rest of the year's data, I'm making an upward trend and the spread increases, but generally for the better too. I fit it to a straight line, but I tend to think that most progress in these games is logarithmic. That is, your gains level off over time. In my log notes, I wrote to myself to eliminate tension and keep my finger focused on the mouse. If you think about little things like the contact between your index finger and the left mouse button instead of letting it fall off of the left mouse button, generally speaking, you might be slower at first, but it's going to improve your form and you won't rattle the mouse as much. So little considerations like this were the cause of my improvement. My conclusion was that I improved, but I never got back to my year-long growth in 1 week. So I suspect that this one is logarithmic, where your progress starts to level off over time, and you get diminishing returns on improvement on each trial. But in my week-long progress, I did improve slightly since it took me, I would say about 5 seconds less or so, and about the same level of accuracy to shoot 100 targets. So, slight improvement, and my results agree with it. The next event is one wall, 6 targets TE. I don't know what TE stands for, but there's 6 targets, you have 60 seconds to hit an unlimited number of targets, potentially. One wall, 6 appear at a time. I highlighted the accuracy and the damage, time to kill, just to emphasize the fact that you need to be hitting these targets fast. I tend not to hit these fast enough, and my main self-criticism was to loosen up. It's target switching almost at its purest. You have pretty good knowledge of where the targets are, because they appear so quickly. There's no way anybody could shoot them fast enough to need to be able to visually react each time, though there is one new one appearing each time that you hit one. So it really governs your in-tuneness with your sensitivity, or it's a good indicator of that. I struggle with this event a lot, and the only time I've really done well with it is after I played an even more difficult version of it with smaller targets, similar to running with a weight vest and then running around without a weight vest on. You can't see much progress here, though, since I wasn't doing that event throughout the training. Even several months' progress shows very little gain, and in my week-long, it almost just looks like a blob. I avoided playing it horribly, but honestly, not much improvement there. And I've done tons and tons, hundreds and hundreds of trials. I'm almost at 1,000 now. Our next event is Close Long Strafes. This one I had to replace with an invincible version because I didn't show it here, but you have 30 seconds to shoot one invincible target in an open space. It moves very unpredictably. Close range, this is a fantastically useful one, especially for any type of game where you're in shotgun battles, close range, or submachine gun. Really, submachine guns would be better. But it's a tracking event at its purest. There is little RNG with the invincible version, though sometimes your mouse goes off the pad. Usually 30 seconds is plenty of time, or is not enough time for you to really do too much. But my main takeaway here was that you need to be using both your arm and your wrist. And sometimes you can isolate different reaction speeds into different parts of your body, so your fingers respond really fast, I noticed, and then after that your wrist also responds pretty fast to what you're thinking in your head, and then after that your arm responds pretty slowly, but your arm's good for developing muscle memory and steady motions. I mean, they're all trade-offs, but some people are arm aimers, some people are, hand aimers, finger aimers, and so on and so forth. I didn't notice much of an upward trend. There was this very, very slight one, and as you can see in my year-long, or several months-long progress anyway, this is definitely a logarithmic one, where you make big gains at the beginning. That's often the return to new hardware, like a better monitor or something of that nature, or just pure hard work, and then it starts to level off over time. But some people are horrifyingly good at this out there too. The next event is Fugla XY long strafes. The XY refers to the axes that the target is being tracked on, because this is one of the rare ones where you're targeting hitting a target on both axes. It's not just moving back and forth or up and down. It's moving all over the place, unpredictably. 60 seconds, one invincible target, one wall, and random pathing here. This one is one of the most useful and one of the most difficult ones to get better at. This is pure tracking. You can change the field of view to make it easier or harder for yourself. I kept it on one field of view for the entire time, though I have experienced big score changes if you change your field of view, but I'm not really going for the high score. I just want to get consistent data through this. Now, obviously, you aren't going to be seeing a lot of big improvement here because it's tracking. It's a hard one to get much better at, especially when it's one target like this, and it's so... It almost feels like just pushing up against a wall every single time that you play it. But you need to grind this over the months if you want to get better at it. But by the time that you are better at this, I promise you'll notice it. My results don't really look like much. You can see slightly less spread on the last few days, which means that I'm performing a bit more consistently. Though this is another one of those events where you seem to get some returns, and then it goes away. The next event is vertical long strafes. This is the most boring, frustrating event I have ever played. It's got like 60 seconds, one invincible target, vertical access only, and a very underutilized movement. It's almost impossible to get better at this. I often feel like, or it takes so goddamn long. Tracking on the vertical axis only, but you need to use your fingers because there's this weird resistance when you get to a low part of the target to not be able to move your arm back on your mouse pad. So I won't lie, each one of these events has a very specific movement or grip that you're using with your hands, so each one is very specifically targeted, for which reason I don't think that they're the best possible way to get better at a single shooter game. But like I said, these results transfer, they apply for every game. You probably won't notice much change here, but in the end, when I looked at all the data that I had collected, I had managed to set one new high score only by a couple points. Another event, though, that I think is logarithmic in its returns. You get a lot better at the beginning, and then it levels off. Tile Frenzy Strafing was the next event. I'm gonna get crucified for doing a Tile Frenzy event, because a lot of people just do only Tile Frenzy when they do Kovaaks, but Strafing is a combination event. You have 30 seconds to shoot potentially an unlimited number of targets on one wall. 3 appear at a time, so there is some small element of visual reaction time. As for this one, target switching if you're fast enough. It's target switching if you're fast enough, but I consider it combination since they are moving, and I'm not that fast yet. You might see a slight difference. Really, the main thing is that I need to loosen up on this event. I tend to be more precise than I should be, and I've noticed that my accuracy tends to be higher and my speed tends to be slower, which kind of goes along with why I played these in the first place. I was an accurate shooter, I was better at long range, but I wasn't good in close range fights, which my friends were faster at, and that's one reason why. Doing a lot of Tile Frenzy for me was very useful, but I hit walls. Anyway, the data for this one is not all that it's okay, it's pretty average. But it's a lot like the one wall 6 targets TE, where it just takes an enormous amount of time to improve, and I haven't even done that many trials of this. This one wasn't in Aimer 7's guide, but I threw it in because I like it. One wall 5 targets Pasu. It's probably my favorite event. Either this one or Pasu Small, because it makes Pasu seem so much easier once you do it. You have 60 seconds to shoot unlimited targets on one wall. 5 appear at a time, so visual reaction time is not an element here, really. If you get good enough at this, I would call it a target switching event, but for me, I think it's combination since I still have to track the targets for a moment before I shoot them to be comfortable. A lot of this relies on you just reacting to seeing when your cursor is over the black of the target. Once again, all these colors are custom made. I pick boring colors because it's really easy to see. If you pick weird colors, you're not going to have as high scores in Kovaak. You need bold contrast to stand out. That's just as plain and simple as it can get. Black and white. This one went, I improved a bit over the week. It's definitely an improvement over time, but this one's also slow. And largely, I set my better scores after I had played a more difficult event again. So the more you can immerse yourself in the most difficult possible situations, the better. And that's why I really advocate switching events often. I wouldn't do it like I did it this week. Anyway, the last event that I did was Ultra Bullet Curves. I wanted to throw in something different and fun for myself because I've just done so many Kovaaks events. 30 seconds to trace lines, don't leave the line, as many as possible. There's an aimer named Prime Dorinko, and I noticed that he had done this, so it just looked like fun to me. It's an alternative, kind of form-based thing where I wasn't really drawing very straight lines between targets. It's very frustrating, and I didn't get a lot of meaningful statistics here, but in general, I suppose if I continued this, I would get fewer failures day by day. If you leave the line at all, obviously you fail the event, and I just tried to get 10 successes each day. I moved my hand in such a specific way, though, that I don't even think it ended up being useful for what I was doing. So I wouldn't do that again. I would probably just stick to Kovaaks, but do pick something to differentiate it for yourself. There's no shame in that. So you've seen my results, and hopefully I've done a decent enough job breaking them down into analysis that you can see for yourself what comes out of a week of aim training. Or if you disagree, you've seen some of my footage too. How much progress do you think I actually made in a week? What caused the change? Was it hardware practice, a sudden realization about mouse grip, feel, and hand position like I mentioned? A lot of those realizations I think were the most long-term benefits of playing with one mouse. Was it doing a marathon of events, doing a harder event than an easy event? Pure luck and chance? There's so many different things that could cause it. I would say you're going to experience the most stepped gains if you're a beginner in your first week. And then when you replace your hardware, I switched from a 60 hertz monitor to a 240 hertz monitor, and that made a world of difference when I first started. I also switched out my mouse, and I just tried changing a lot of things while practicing a lot. After that, gains are much slower. It's like beginner gains followed by hard gains in a gym, or whatever you call it. I personally found that the most meaningful progress was made when I came back on a new day after a long practice session from a day or two ago, and some realization was made in that time, whether it was when I was sleeping or subconsciously, about how my hand should be positioned on the mouse for each event, or I just felt really engaged and focused on the task. Frequently, I would be listening to music that got me in a mental state of flow. I found that anime theme songs were really helpful. Engagement and mouse feel are really important, and you can practice both of these things by showing up consistently to practice and maximizing. I know that's a cop-out answer, practice more, but you really need to maximize your number of opportunities to make these interesting realizations about how your hand and body should be positioned. Ergonomics is a major factor. There are videos about this by other aim trainers, some where they talk just about how your finger should be touching the mouse button, breaking down best practices for aiming in excruciating detail, such as exactly how they should be angled, the amount of tension, and how much contact your fingers should be with the cloth of the mouse pad. But it's hard to say because it's all really detailed bullshit. I hate to say this, but it reminds me of learning to properly fret a guitar. And so many of these things are difficult to describe and come only after long hours of doing them or being professionally tutored by an aim coach in real life or via a webcam. And so the best I can say is to just play more and be self-analytical and experiment with different methods of tension and levels of tension in your hand and mouse positions, and actually think consciously about what mental and physical processes occur as you attempt to shoot targets. Are you flinching because you haven't slept enough? Alcohol is a depressant and will slow your reaction time. Are you stressed from work? Are your hands cold? Literally, all of these things can change it. You can effectively make progress by resting and maximizing the number of times you refresh your engagement and thinking so that these little realizations can be made, and so that these miniature epiphanies lead you to improvement. So grinding out marathons, more hours, necessarily is not better, but consistently spending your time in engaged, deliberate practice where you're fully aware of your actions and thinking about them critically, spaced. Drawing cause-effect relationships between your mouse feel and improved aiming scores is, in my opinion, the best thing that you can do to improve your aim over time. How much did I improve my aim over a week? A little bit. Over a few months, it was more drastic. It definitely improved, but not by as much as if I were a newbie again. One of my final thoughts is that there are diminishing marginal returns to every hour of training, and it takes more and more practice to make the same level strides until you start to feel like you've dropped off and you've plateaued and you aren't making any progress at all once again. Progress is slowly lost over time, though you seem to retain some sort of muscle memory as I did, because coming back didn't take me as long. Perhaps making practice after a hiatus seemed to go by faster. You're only remembering skills rather than learning them all over again for the first time. As mentioned, I was also particularly interested in whether I was limited and stuck in my bad aim because of my fairly average visual reaction time. It's maybe slightly above average, but for my age, I would say it's average. And I wanted to confirm or deny whether that would actually limit my potential to improve at aiming, and if so, in what events or in what games. Based on what I've read, visual reaction time is largely set from person to person, but you can maximize your chances of reacting more quickly given the right sleep and level of focus. It's a bit mysterious to me still, and I haven't done any extensive studies into it besides read a few articles, but it has a general tendency to stay the same or become slower over time as you age. My practice trials seem to confirm this. As a reference, I'm 25 years old, but a lot of MLG pros are much younger than me and have horrifyingly good reaction times, but some don't. But still, there are plenty of great aimers with poor reaction time too, and who even outplay the pros with poor reaction time. So it's all about training your hand in the end, and just more hours will help. Sure, it does help though. If you ever want to test out your visual reaction time, or VRT, there is a website called Human Benchmark. I'll link it below. Just make sure you're using a monitor with a high refresh rate, or your reaction time will be skewed high by perhaps hundreds of milliseconds. I first tried it on a smartphone and thought for an agonizing week that I had the 300 plus millisecond reaction time of a much older man. Further questions, you might be wondering if this actually affected my game performance. Well, it did to a surprising degree. I did a before-after test. For further analysis and a bit of light experimentation, I decided to see if my KD ratio in-game supported my findings, and if I could find a slight but meaningful improvement in game-to-game in CSGO. I picked a simple game mode, Arms Race, that I enjoyed, and where it was fairly close to being a free-for-all to minimize the RNG. I switched lobbies every couple games to minimize the impact of individual player performance. Before and after the experiment, I used CSGO to see if these practice mechanics alone would significantly affect the KD ratio, and I took before and after shots. Add on the training in the games, it was actually an outstanding amount of growth. I was surprised, but when I calibrated my 360-degree turn so that it matched my Kovaaks, I was scoring about a half a point higher in my KD ratio, which for someone starting with 1-1 KD is pretty impressive. So if you enjoyed this study, here's some areas for future growth. Obviously, this wasn't a fully controlled experiment, but hey, you need a lot of data to spark new and interesting ideas for improvement. So I'm really glad that I did it, and I'm also very motivated for challenges like this that involve a lot of self-improvement, grindiness, and work ethic, and improving at competitive gaming mechanics in a short period of time. There are plenty of opportunities to expand upon this challenge/experiment in the future, and I'm curious as to what other people will think of this challenge in the comments. Does it make... my ultimate goal was, does it make you want to try it? I love to motivate people with this type of thing. If you aren't interested in FPS games because of mechanics, Twitch shooter-like reflex requirements, did this motivate you or make it seem any more enticing to play them to you? I honestly find FPS games a lot more interesting now than I did before. I played things like League of Legends or something more strategy-based like Teamfight Tactics, but now after this, I want to play more FPS games because I feel like my mechanics are something I can genuinely improve on. Do you work out and do you play video games? If so, did this somehow help bring them together? For me, I wanted to gain a better sense of my own engagement level if I were to hypothetically do this grind every single day along with content creation, and would the spark of my interest stay lit? To be honest, I used to find that streaming it with a camera aimed at my hand was useful for learning from expert aim enthusiasts who would actually watch my stream and be kind enough to offer me helpful tips and advice. Though I couldn't bring myself to fully concentrate, and frequently I would set Kovaak's leaderboard records only after I was done streaming during independent practice time, and after long hours of grinding just one single event, which became more and more labor intensive after a few months and started to take away from the fun. But perhaps if I could think of more ways to make it interesting and directly see the ties between relevant FPS games where mechanics are more important, I think a lot more extensive practice routine would be more interesting to learn about. I'm not sponsored by any of these games, I just find it interesting for a really grindy experiment is all, and I find it engaging to me as a gamer and as a person who's interested in self-improvement. What are your thoughts? Would you like to see me try and expand this challenge to a particular game? There are many opportunities to use native aim trainers built into or modded for games like CSGO or Fortnite, but the main reason I hesitate is because of the enormous boring time requirement and the feeling of progress dampening out after months of doing it. Watching an update video like this might be exciting, but watching the grind itself is not always that exciting. The results are definitely exciting though, and if I didn't have a stream full of interested aiming enthusiasts helping to critique my hand positioning and posture for months, I probably wouldn't have grinded so much or found the right hardware to help me improve. Still, maybe that's your type of thing, and you have the FPS bug and a game you already love, and you're looking to see what could motivate you to get to the next level. One final area I didn't mention were graphics cards and hardware, since I've largely already figured out most of this stuff before beginning the experiment, but they're an area where beginners could seriously benefit from learning more. I was completely naive when I started. I used a really heavy mouse with low response time that was wireless. It was by Logitech. They make fine wireless mice, but this one in particular didn't have a very good response time. I didn't have anything else set up. I don't even think I had a mouse pad. I used the following equipment in my preferred order of importance once I finally upgraded. An Alienware 240Hz monitor, I think it's an Alienware 25, HD resolution at 1920 by 1080. Don't pick 4K, and no more than about 23 inches. You don't want higher resolution or a bigger monitor for aiming, because it will slow down the game, and you won't be able to take in the whole screen with a glance of your eye when you're sitting in front of it. My graphics card is an NVIDIA RTX 2080 Ti. It's complete overkill, but I never got less than 240 frames per second. You need a graphics card supporting 240 FPS. I was also streaming this simultaneously. Yes, a stream card would have worked better, but I had no idea what I was doing, and extra monitors do help you log your progress on the side. My mouse was a Logitech G Pro wireless, which has incredibly fast response time, and wireless mice have come a long way, though if you ask an Aim Pro, they probably own like 100 different mice and mouse pads. I used a large Zoe mousepad, and my processor, not that it makes much of a difference, was an i9-9900K. If I were really serious about this, I'd probably switch back to my desk-sized mousepad, and I'd get a 60% keyboard, and probably look for the next best monitors when they come out. If you ever want to talk to me about this type of challenge, I'd be really interested. If you want to send me a tweet with your data and results, leave a comment, or even just make your own aim training video, I welcome it. Or if you ever complete your own challenge and training progress, I invite you to give it a try and share how much progress you can make in a week, or in a month, or in a year, especially if you're a beginner. And if you want to follow along with my progress, I've included a link to my spreadsheets to literally tens of thousands of data points in case if you want to compare results with mine. I've also included a link to probably the most helpful document, Aimer7's Aim Guide, which helped me, so you can see some potential aim workout routines, in case if you ever get the bug to try it for yourself. As always, my name is Ambiguous Amphibian. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed, or that this video helped you enjoy whatever it was that led you to it, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.